I'm visited by Andie Margolskee, the author of the first crowdfunded adventure for Draw Steel, The Great Thaw of Gryzmithrak Spire. We talk about the adventure, sure, but with Andie having designed adventures for multiple systems, we end up talking a bunch about what different systems are good at. I'm John Denor, and this is Goblin Points. Welcome to Goblin Points, Andie.
Hi, thanks. Happy to be here.
So, tell us a bit about yourself and also how you kind of came across, I guess, Draw Steel, but maybe also Matt Colville and MCDM.
Sure, yeah. So I run a small tabletop publishing company called Margot Mods. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. I came across Matt Colville's work first on YouTube with the Running the Game series, which I think is probably a common story across people in this space. I remember buying Flea Mortals, thinking it was the best 5e monster book I'd ever seen. Had it completely rewire my brain for combat and running combat, and was really inspired to sort of bake that into my own design. And then when they, started up their own RPG backer kit, it was like, well, I have to pledge this. I have to follow along for this process and see how the sausage is made. And that's been a really rewarding and interesting experience so far.
I watched an interview where you actually mentioned Flea Mortals as part of your inspiration. I think that might have been in relation to the murders at Lorelak Manor. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yeah, so Murders at Lorelak Manor was my first Kickstarter for 5e, which was a pair of murder mystery adventures, because I sort of a mystery buff. I like writing sort of complicated intrigue, sort of interfaction conflict and mysteries where the answer is really sort of surprising. So I put together a murder mystery Kickstarter and baked in, especially some of the minion design from Flea Mortals, some ideas there. Because I just really like the idea of high stakes, fast combat that ends quickly in the context of a murder mystery, because you want to keep the mystery ball rolling. You don't want to get bogged down in long combat for an hour and a half, 3 hours or whatever, until the end in the climactic encounter. And then it's okay to sort of, pull out all the stops and go big with the encounter. Yeah, there are some just really interesting ideas from Flea Mortals that made their way into that book.
I have tried to run small mysteries, and I've always ended up with, whenever combat comes up, it just kind of falls apart.
Yeah, the key is to make your accomplices and your minions sort of easy to kill but threatening in their own way. So I gave these ink double doppelganger creatures the ability to petrify you in ink, but they had to hit you enough times to get it to start to trigger. And you could knock them down in one hit, but there were a bunch of them in a little horde. And that works really well, especially in a mystery, because one of the things that 5e players do all the time when there's stuff to investigate is they split the party. Which is just a very natural thing to do when you're gathering clues, because it doesn't feel threatening. But in that mystery, you're surrounded by enemies and you just don't know it yet, which I think is really fun.
I was actually kind of wondering, because I was looking at these mysteries. Now that you've kind of worked on something for 5e, and now you're working on this adventure for Draw Steel, I was kind of wondering, do you think it's possible to make those mystery adventures for Draw Steel, or are they better suited for 5e, which is kind of geared towards being more kind of inclusive when it comes to different kinds of playstyles?
My gut reaction is that it would work perfectly in Draw Steel.
Oh, really?
And the reason for that is because there are still these set piece encounters at the end, right? And in Draw Steel, you can still, I would probably rearrange some things and maybe incorporate negotiations or montage tests or something like that. There would be work to do, but the conceit of a mystery is that there are clues to get in a variety of different ways, and there are enemies to find and defeat, right? Like you can sort of map that story structure onto anything. And so I don't think it would be a huge problem. I would just have to make new stat blocks and rejigger some mechanics and change it from like, DCs to different difficulty tests and work in some successes and failures with consequences and whatever. I think it would be doable. Actually, I think it would be fun.
Interesting. I would have thought that with the kind of focus on combat that Draw Steel has, it would not maybe fit as well. But I guess I just need to do more montage tests.
Well, so I don't even know if I agree with that. So there are, in that book in particular, one of the design choices that I made was I had sort of investigation tables. Like you would sort of investigate a murder scene and collect clues, and you would roll like an investigation or medicine check. And depending on the result of your roll, you would get more and more and more and more clues. So there were like 15 to 20 brackets, 10 to 15, 5 to 10, and 1 to 5. And all you have to do to like keep a mystery progressing is make sure that even on a failure, you get something, right? And you can do that in Draw Steel just by saying, okay, that's an easy test where you get a success and there's a consequence.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really easy to map onto a mystery. But I also spend a lot of time thinking about mysteries. So I'm sure that I'm sort of barreling through some of the challenges.
Moving on to more Draw Steel centered stuff, I guess. The reason that I heard about you recently is because of your adventure that you're crowdfunding over on something called Crowdfunder. First of all, can I ask about the choice of platform?
Shay and I, so Shay is the other author on this project. We're part of this small community which operates out of the Storytelling Collective. This is the Adventure Writers Academy, which is just sort of like a small group of people who write and publish tabletop stuff. And we have like, weekly meetings and things like that. And there's like a book club and all kinds of stuff. The woman who runs that, Ashley Warren, turned us on to this event, which was the tabletop nonstop event run by Crowdfunder. And she was just like, yeah, people should do this. That seems fun. And Shay and I were like, well, we operate well with deadlines, so why not? We just decided to put something together, wanted to see how it would go, and it's gone great. It's gone fantastically. Yeah. We didn't have a very big goal because we weren't trying to make a very big project. And I've been personally so sort of like surprised and overwhelmed and happy with both the reception of our project and also the willingness of the sort of MCDM Draw Steel community to pitch in for like community copies, for instance, for people who, maybe want to try out the game, but don't want to pitch in money yet. Like there are so many community copies that will be available when we launch. And I think that's awesome.
I saw that as an option. And I have to admit, I purchased some community copies too, because the original pledge wasn't that much, at least not for my wallet. So I felt obliged to spend a bit more. But moving on from the platform to the actual adventure, the great Thaw of Gryzmithrak Spire. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You absolutely are. We picked a ridiculous dragon name in the tradition of Matt Colville. You gotta write to the setting, right? And
yeah.
His dragon names are always intense.
I just earlier today I recorded the monthly roundup episode of Goblin Points, and I referred to the to the adventure twice. I don't know why I ended up putting the name in twice so I had to practice basically before I got to that section, and I was just really hoping that I pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. You nailed it. So Shay and I actually talked about the name of the dragon quite a bit back and forth, where he was like, "Oh, I don't know, I feel like it's too many syllables," and I was like, "Shay, find me a dragon name in, for instance, Flea Mortals that isn't 3 syllables or more." Yeah. So Gryzmithrak is this dead rhyme dragon who still sort of persists in this adventure because her heart is this magical artifact operating as a seal on this prison of this very destructive fire elemental that Gryzmithrak and her legion of kobolds, the Rime Legion, sealed away centuries ago, and sort of plunged that entire area into sort of like a snowy perpetual winter, which is better than what it used to be, which was this sort of hellish, fiery wasteland ruled by an angry fire elemental.
So in the adventure itself, that prison of the fire elemental is about to break down. I'm assuming that's the Great Thaw.
Yes, that is the Great Thaw. The snow is melting, the prison is breaking, and there's this cool bit of lore in Draw Steel that dragons in Orden, or I guess Vesloria, they are sort of transformed elementals in response to like condensed emotion, which I just thought was a very cool bit of lore, because it gives you a way to make dragons from these like sort of high-powered elemental creatures. And so this breaking down of the prison is happening alongside this transformation from elemental to a dragon, actually, which is sort of alongside this upwelling of new kobolds, the Calamity Kobolds, led by their Pontifex, who claims to have found a new saint in their like heroic kobold ancestor, the great inventor who fought with Gryzmithrak. But he's lying.
Oh, okay.
He's lying, and actually he's been worshipping this elemental / fire dragon for quite some time, and is on the verge of breaking him out. And that's sort of like the underlying intrigue going on.
You've ended up smashing your goal of $250. Really, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. We're super happy about it.
So I saw one of the stretch goals is to get some custom art. That's the one that was just unlocked. Is that also made by? That's all done by Shay, or is it?
No. So for one of my projects, which is in pre-launch on Kickstarter, called Exoecology for Monster Hunters. It's like a big monster book for like eco-horror mystery adventures in D&D 5e. I've been working with this artist who does fantastic character art. His name is Angelo, and he's been doing a lot of characters for that book. We have a great working relationship. He does a great job. And I knew that I would want to hire him if we raised enough money to warrant custom art. And we did, and so we will. And I couldn't be happier, because he does great work, and I'm really excited to see what he does with Shield Maiden Voss and the Pontifex.
The Pontifex again.
Yes, he'll get the art. He's a big deal.
I think you mentioned it in the crowdfunder description, or I might have read it somewhere else. But you used to work in climate science, I think, or you've got a PhD in oceanography or something like that. Is that correct?
All of these things are correct. So, just a brief overview of my life. I was a high school teacher, actually, for a couple of years, also teaching environmental science and biology and chemistry to high school students. Decided that I wanted to get back into science. Went and got a PhD in chemical oceanography, studying sort of like low oxygen regions and climate sensitivity of highly sensitive regions of the ocean, and continued that work into my postdoc. So for like 10 years, I was doing climate science research using mathematical ocean models.
Wow, okay. And then this is what's a bit wild to me, at least, because at some point you decided that you wanted to do TTRPG publishing instead, which seems like an insane career move.
Hey, I mean, I can't say that it's not a wild thing to do, but I will say that I am a lot more creatively fulfilled. It's a lot more fun, and I get to interact with a lot of people who are really excited about the stuff that they do. And so I am much happier doing this kind of work than I was during either my postdoc or my PhD.
Wow, okay.
But so I started small, or relatively small, where in 2023, I started publishing expansions to like official Wizards of the Coast modules, like Sun the Citadel and Forge of Fury, and publishing them on the DM's Guild, because I I wanted to run more D&D, but the official modules weren't doing it for me. Like, they didn't have the things that I needed. Like, I needed characters that were interesting with like compelling motivations and like high stakes conflict that I cared about and that my players might care about. And so I basically had to write an entire sort of overlaid narrative for those modules, and thought to myself, well, I might as well publish it because I'm putting in all of this work anyways, and I might as well learn like how to do layout and commission a little bit of art and see how it does. And those are 2 bestsellers on DM's Guild. They've done quite well. People are still buying them even now. That was exciting. But the DM's Guild is good for sort of like general exposure and getting your feet under you, but is not a way to make money, really.
It's rough.
Yeah, and so I started looking for other ways to like actually at least get my investment, not in time, but investment in monetarily back on these projects, because I wanted to sort of keep going bigger and bigger and bigger. And that was where Murders at Lorlock Manor came in, because I was like, well, everybody's doing crowdfunders. I'm sure I'll do better there. I can do a bigger project, see how it goes, commission a bunch of art, and just sort of keep ramping up, because I am addicted to that next bigger step and being more and more ambitious. Yeah. So that's sort of how I ended up where I am. Now I'm in the midst of working on a very large Kickstarter, which is Exoecology for Monster Hunters, which I mentioned, and doing a bunch of smaller projects to sort of keep my brain agile and dabble in other systems. And now I'm addicted to Draw Steel, so I can't resist just like thinking about how fun it would be to write about like the Woad and the elves and just like all of the like sort of creepy face stuff that I find to be really fun. I've actually been recently reading Matt Colville's books. I finished Priest a couple days ago. Now I'm like a third of the way into Thief. I'll be done in like a day or two.
Yeah.
And I just like the world. I think it's really fun. This like high fantasy action gritty combat stuff is not something that I've gotten satisfyingly anywhere else. So
I really I agree. It feels very different reading both Matt's novels, and I also find it interesting you find the Woad such a fun concept, because that's something that really doesn't interest me at all.
So I'm like an environmental scientist, right? I'm in climate science.
Fair enough.
So having a place of spooky trees where you have like weird and wonderful things happen is perfect for me. I love coming up with like interesting storylines about, nature doing really messed up stuff, because a lot of it's like allegory. I don't know. I just think it's fun. I think there's something there. There are always spooky trees in all of my adventures. Like in Exoecology, there's this Twilight Glory seed mother that shows up. It's this awful creature made up of vines that like reach out and connect all of the trees and creatures in a forest into like a central hive mind and turn them into these like undead thralls. And so the trees sleep in the day and hunt at night. Which I just think is like a cool vibe.
Okay, that's fair. That's very cool.
Yeah. Like that.
That is very cool.
That's the kind of stuff that just gets me really excited.
You mentioned designing for different systems, I guess, because I also noticed you've made a couple of things for Candela Obscura, I think.
Yes, I have.
And I think that's kind of interesting, because this might be my own assumptions showing through, but I think a lot of people usually design mostly for one system. Or rather, I should say, I think people very often design only for 5e.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what I'm actually trying to say. How different is it to design for different systems? Because D&D is very malleable, I guess, to kind of what kind of adventures and things you could do with it. Draw Steel tries to do something a bit more specific, and Candela Obscura is just not very like any of those, at least in my mind. I haven't played Candela Obscura. I've only like an overview of the rules and how it's supposed to be played. But how different are the systems to actually design for, or are there like very many overlapping ideas that just kind of expressed in different ways, but that are not actually that different when it kind of gets down to the metal, I guess.
So it depends on what you're trying to do, right?
Okay.
I would say that, I mean, different systems have different strengths, right? Like that's inescapable. You know, combat in D&D versus combat in Candela Obscura versus combat in Drawsteel will feel different, right? Drawsteel
Sure.
is the most tactical of those three. Candela Obscura is mostly vibes. And, you know, D&D is somewhere in between, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's just the combat system, right? But if
Yeah.
you're also writing, I'm very interested in narratives, and I'm really interested in characters, and I'm really interested in mysteries. And a mystery, broadly speaking, is you collect clues until you've solved it. And that you can overlay on literally anything. Right? So like so take a murder mystery, for instance. It has a very like particular structure. You have to find a body, right? You have to discover there was a murder. You
Sure.
have to sort of canvass the suspects, right? Which can involve interrogation or using magic on people, right? Like that's some of the stuff available to you in D&D or Drawsteel or Candle Obscura even. And then you go around and you like gather clues, which is sort of an exploration. And at some point, you're going to get clues and leads that produce some kind of escalating tension that lead you to the climax when you finally discover what the hell's actually going on. And you can nest that mystery in as many other mysteries as you want, right? To like scale it up to a world or a political system or a city or a nation or like a multiverse, right? Like you can nest those game structures within each other, or story structures, I guess I should say. And that doesn't depend on your system at all.
Sure.
That's just a story structure. And I'm very interested in story structures and telling interesting stories. The game mechanic stuff is like, well, how do you make the climax interesting? Right. And the answer will be different in those different systems.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Right. And what are the obstacles between you and the clues or the leads, or how do you interrogate people? In Drawsteel, that might be a negotiation or a montage test. In Candela Obscura, it's going to be a little bit more freeform, right? You're going to be asked for some skill rolls and you'll discover some stuff and maybe encounter like intermediate monsters and get some bleed and do some like dramatic role play. And in D&D 5e, it's again sort of in between the two, right? Like you do sort of a mix. I, as an academic, am used to seeing patterns and being like, those are the same thing, you know, at their roots. And so it's simple. And you can just think about that part in the same way, and the different parts you can adjust to. And I think that's just sort of how I was trained. So I don't think it's...
That's really interesting because as part of Drawsteel's development, they changed the dice resolution mechanic, basically. First moving from the 2d6 to the power roll, and then the 2d10s with the power roll. And I saw people online mentioning that they're basically over a year into development. They've got basically a year left, and they're now, even now, changing dice mechanics. This is big trouble for this game. For me, at least, not on the inside, but at least close to the sausage making, I guess. That didn't seem like a really big deal to me, because that's not really, in some ways, it's not the core part of the game, really, which dice you roll. That's just a way to kind of resolve. The goal of the game is to create heroic fantasy, or cinematic heroic fantasy. And what kind of dice you are is kind of secondary to that goal, I feel. What you're saying about mysteries is that, well, mysteries are kind of universal. It's just how you kind of do the details that kind of differs between the different systems. And it I don't know, it just felt kind of similar to how Drawsteel was designed, that, yeah, we've got this vibe that we're trying to hit, and how we roll dice, that's kind of secondary. That's just in service to hit this vibe.
I think that I don't want to discount the role of statistics in games, right? So
Okay, fair enough.
The like likelihood of certain outcomes is important to the feeling of the game as you're playing it.
Mm.
Because if you're playing a game where you're expected to fail when you roll, you're scared when you have to, right?
Yeah,
And there are games
yeah.
that are designed around that, and that's important to preserving a vibe. And that's like going to be more suited to like cosmic horror, Cthulhu stories or whatever, where
Yeah.
it's like, if you're in combat, oh no. and that's the point, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to trivialize that like dice mechanics are important. They're critical and they play an important role. But I think that an even bigger choice that they made is, skipping the attack roll, right? Like you hit, you will do damage. So will the enemies, right? You do always march towards this win or loss condition, which is that you run out of hit points or your enemies do, right? So that choice to never miss cuts out a lot of weird edge cases in particularly D&D that can feel really sort of degenerate and weird, and you're like, that's unrealistic, or just that like create this sort of perverse game outcome, which especially in draw steel, since you want to incentivize the accumulation of victories, you want to like get people to actually make a choice between resting and victory point accumulation. You have to have this steady march towards a win or loss condition. So having the enemies always hitting you and always depleting your hit points means that choice will always be meaningful, which is an important part of what a game is.
Yeah.
Those meaningful choices. So I am a staunch defender of the importance of game mechanics, but I also recognize that you can do a lot more with a system of game mechanics than a lot of people think you can. And stories are stories. That's just where I'm at. Like people are people. Stories are stories. You can do a lot of things. So that's how I think about it.
I'm not a game designer. I'm not a designer at all, really, when it comes to TTRPG stuff. To me, as an observer, I guess, it felt. I do a lot of research on what people are saying about Draw Steel and MCDM as part of doing the podcast. So, of course, I come across a lot of criticism too, and let's not dwell too much on that. But I just found it so interesting because the change of the dice really seemed to like to so many people. It seemed like a certain. It seemed so much like a red flag to them that the game was kind of struggling to figure out what it was supposed to be. And for me, it seemed so much. So it seems so insignificant. So that's what kind of where I'm coming from, where people are going like, oh no, they haven't figured out how to roll dice yet, and which ones to roll and how often you should roll them. And to me, that was like, yeah, but that's not really.
I think that there's like a lack of recognition there of like how strong the pull of their game design tenets are, right? Because they've had on their mind this entire time this like tactical cinematic heroic fantasy, right?
Yeah.
Like that's been their goal the entire time. And the choices you make along the way and the things that you cut on the cutting room floor are still in service to that goal, right? It's like, if you didn't change things along the way, then like, what are you doing? I don't know. It's just, like you have to make changes. That's how it goes. That's what development is.
Honestly, it feels a bit like a lot of people start with the dice mechanic and then build a game on top of it. It feels like a very significant part of what their game is about. So if you change that, you basically change the whole game.
So I think that there's a little bit of truth to that. Like I said, I'm a staunch defender of game mechanics and their importance. Like if you're playing like Kids on Bikes, for instance, with the exploding dice, it's like you roll maximum on the die and then you roll another die because you rolled maximum, and you can keep exploding.
Yeah.
That creates an experience at the table, which is this like slot machine version of like, how high can we go? Like these are the really high octane, exciting moments. And, you design a game around that because that's the kind of feeling that those dice evoke. But if when you set out, at the beginning with a particular kind of roll and it works a little bit as you're sort of like getting your feet under you, and then you realize like, actually, that's not hitting the note that we want, of course you have to change it. It is an important part of the game. But not because they don't know what they're shooting for, but because they know that they haven't hit it yet. And that's important.
Yeah. That's a way better way to say it than what I said.
I spend far too much time thinking and talking about these kinds of things. So,
also, I want to ask, because I I've seen somewhere or heard somewhere that you mentioned you wanted to make some stuff for Daggerheart.
Yeah. Wow. Ooh, these are deep dives. This is fun.
I find that system interesting. I haven't looked into the rules. I think I've seen the video with Matt Mercer explaining how to play the game that he released like a month or two ago. And that's basically my only like deep dive into how the game is supposed to work, basically. And I find it really interesting because it feels like at least they're trying to do something different. It feels a bit like they're trying to do something similar to what MCDM is trying to do, where they have an idea of what kind of game they want, and they're trying to design the game to kind of in service of that idea. I guess what I'm asking is, what do you think of Daggerheart?
So I think Daggerheart is a really interesting sort of experiment, and I want to play more of it, and I will play more of it when it comes out in May, and that's very exciting. And I think that they have sort of a different goal than MCDM, right? So Darrington Press is trying to make a game that is sort of fiction first, right? And really supports narratives and narrative outcomes and narrative choices. Because, of course, Critical Role is a very narrative-heavy game. They really value sort of those like role-playing choices. And so they've invested a lot of thought into a different part of like fantasy tabletop gaming than MCDM has, right? So MCDM, of course, they do a lot of like lore and world building, but they have this beautiful sort of tactical engine for running combat, which I really like. And Daggerheart is, I think, trying to give game masters the tools to run sort of more narrative games. So an example of that is, instead of having like setting books, they're functioning off of campaign frames, which are sort of like my interpretation of them. Again, these aren't like fully released yet, so I don't know what their final form will be. But my understanding of campaign frames is that they're almost the like quick and dirty what you need for a setting to sort of like jump into a story and like maybe have a couple of new mechanics to change the game and adapt it to the story that you're telling, right? I think that is a really interesting strategy, because I think even part of their like world building session at the start of a game is like people choosing things on a map and saying what it is, like the players. So like giving some of the narrative agency to the players. So I just think that there are a lot of like interesting choices that I know that they have been thinking about, and I don't know what they'll land on in the final version.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm down to try all kinds of things, because I'll learn something from it, and I'll take something away to, my 5e writing or Draw Steel or even Candela Obscura or whatever, right? Like I learn something in each of these systems about what different mechanics do at the table and how to write around them and incorporate them into games. Like in Exoecology for Monster Hunters, for instance, I was thinking about like what's an interesting way to do regional effects and like capture that in magic items you've crafted from these monsters that you've killed.
Yeah, well, wow.
And yeah, sure. So that's like one of the main shticks. And so there's like, the cover of the book is this giant Nova crab, which I think of as like, the crab version of a chromatic dragon. And so it's like this Nova crab turns all of this place into like lava burrows and, fiery wastelands. And how do you make that an interesting sort of mechanical thing? And I mentioned kids on bikes with their exploding dice mechanic before. It's like, well, what if all of the fire magic in this area exploded just like it does in Kids on Bikes? And what if you had a little blow dart gun that shoots fire darts that could explode in your face and do more damage to your enemies and yourself, right? Expanding the AoE and like increasing the damage and giving you some friendly fire. And I just, as a player, would be so excited to pull out like an axe that did something like that, because I'd be like, oh, it's time for this like really risky maneuver. Everybody, strap in. And that does something at the table, right? So I am interested in trying and writing for more systems. and Daggerheart's on the list.
It sounds like you're actually building quite a few systems on top of 5e in the
Yeah, exoecology for monster hunters. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, people sort of always do that with magic items, right? It's like from sort of a like design standpoint, all different kinds of people will map on like travel rules or downtime rules or crafting or whatever, right? And a lot of people do that with their items too. And so the shtick for this book is, what if these creatures are being summoned from other planes and they're invasive species and they're sort of ruining the material plane as they're here? And what if you could harness the things that made them dangerous? And I think that's really fun. Because that's, again, sort of my environmental science standpoint, where it's like, okay, so the Galapagos Islands are full of weird creatures, right? Because they're like a small island where the founder effect is really important, and you get things that you don't get anywhere else. You have like this small microcosm of weird creatures. And you can introduce a new creature that totally disrupts that ecosystem and devastates it, right? Because you have this like isolated island effect where it's like a closed ecosystem, and things that outcompete the other creatures will take it over, right? And what if you considered the entire material plane as an isolated ecosystem, and introducing these things ruined that ecosystem, right? Like that's sort of where the idea starts. And I just think it's fun.
That actually makes me want to run more 5e.
Well, run this book, maybe not 5e in general, but
yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's a good. So part of the reason that 5e is so pervasive in the tabletop space is because you can graft things onto it very easily, which some people would say is like, well, that's because it's not even a game, and like that's sort of silly in my opinion. I think that's why it's been sort of so long-lived and so well-loved. It's easy to add stuff to it.
I feel like now that we're 10 years plus into the 5e era, I guess, it feels like more people are coming around to the notion that the strength of 5e is how flexible it is, and that I'm kind of a bit, or kind of two minds on the thing, because on the one hand, I kind of want the game to be complete, but on the other hand, it's very nice that you're able to customize it that much, that you can make it somewhat your own, or kind of tweak it for different kind of situations, and still have like a foundation that you always can rely on. We're all making the same mechanics, are the same, the spells, the classes are the same, but then we got this extra topping of interesting stuff on the top.
At its core, right, you can play a tabletop game. I actually did this. So I was like hiking in the mountains with my brother and a couple of our other relatives, and he asked if I could run D&D for them. I was like, no, we're in the middle of the mountain. What are you talking about? I don't have any dice. I don't have an adventure. I don't have anything. You don't have character sheets. There's nothing we can do. And then 5 minutes later, I was like, okay, actually, we could play D&D. Because I had an idea. Because all you really need to, like, quote unquote, run D&D is have a system for skill checks, have a system for class-based abilities, which would have to be massively reduced if you're hiking through the mountains with people who have never played D&D before. And what I did was essentially, I would pick a number in my head and decide how difficult it was going to be. So let's say I picked 10, and I would say, like, this is going to be an easy check. This is all sort of internal. And so anything within 5 of that 10 will pass. And then I just say, pick a number between 0 and 20, for instance. Right? And then you add your modifiers to see whether or not you're in the band around the number that I chose. And you can choose 0 and say, now choose 0 between 20, and you've made it harder because now they need 0 to 5 instead of 5 to 15. And it's just, it's like a sort of hand wavy, like, math solution to ability checks, because I didn't have anything else. And like, you can quote unquote play D&D that way. And a lot of people would say, well, that's not D&D because you're not using, the explicit class mechanics, and you're not rolling dice, and you're not doing that, but it captures the vibe, right? Like you capture sort of the essence of like, here are infrequent skill tests that you solve randomly with some modifiers to make you more successful on average than people who aren't as good at stuff as you are. And then you give some abilities based on classes, where it's like, do you want to play a rogue? Cool. I'll give you advantages on like hiding and stealth and whatever, and make you do extra damage when you roll damage, right? And of course, I'm not tracking like exact hit point totals. I'm doing sort of the like, I think Daggerheart does this, where it's like mostly just like a number of hits. Like the hit point totals are just very small. So it's easy to keep track of. So like you can just sort of make small adjustments and capture the vibe and tell people like you're playing more or less D&D. It's like D&D light. So I think I have a very flexible view of like what a game system is and does, but it's fun.
I wonder then, where does it stop being D&D and just start being like my immediate thought was, what's it called? It's called Roll for Shoes, I think.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've heard of this. Yeah.
Where you just start with a D6 and then you kind of just roll your way away from there. So I'm wondering, where does it stop being D&D? Or in this case, maybe D&D is just like a generic term for a TTRPG, which for a lot of people outside of the hobby, those are equivalent.
Yeah, I think so. Technically, it is not D&D. It's like a sort of D&D derivative, right? Because it's got a different resolution mechanic, which is going to be important to the game. But it has all the trappings of D&D with the like specific classes and even just like the actual moves, right? Like the rogue did actually get sneak attack, right? So you just take like the iconic class moves. It's almost like a diceless level 0 D&D is essentially what I did. Right? Where at level 0, you get your most signature ability. So sneak attack, rage, wild shape, stuff like that. And that's it, right? That's the only thing that sort of makes it asymmetric between the players, which makes it simple enough to run when you're hiking in the mountains and close enough to D&D for people to be like, yeah, I kind of felt like D&D. I mean, you can't do the like tactical grid-based combat or whatever.
Sure.
But you can do a lot.
I just struggle with calling it D&D.
Hey, that's fine. I probably shouldn't call it D&D, but I like doing it to be incendiary.
I should say influenced, maybe poisoned by the discussions on, is D&D anything except just D&D? What are D&D even trying to do? It's kind of survival horror when you're low level, but then it tries to turn into a heroic fantasy, but you're never really going to get there because who plays past level 7 or level 11? Level 11? I mean, a lot of people have very many opinions about what D&D is and isn't. So I think I'm just kind of poisoned by that. Mostly just watching the discussions where people try to explain why all the different ways that D&D might be good or bad, I guess.
I think that discussion misses sort of a critical component of like what conversations are supposed to be about, right? Because it's trying to categorize, it's trying to put things in boxes, right? And say, this is the box for this thing, as opposed to like, what can you do at the table? Like, what's fun? I don't know. It feels like besides the point to me. Like, I don't care what box you put it in. I care about like, well, what can we do together and what will be fun?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So I'm sorry for poking the bear and calling it D&D.
I don't actually really mind. I never would have thought of calling it D&D, but I think that's just me liking to put things in boxes. So that's just my bias showing through.
No, it's a natural thing to do. I do it all the time. I'm not above this.
I was just thinking, I've had a lot of fun running one-page RPGs.
Yes.
And one of the ones I found the most fun, basically because it had like it's this game called Lasers and Feelings.
Okay.
And it, the dice resolution mechanic it uses, you got a d6, and then you decide, you have a scale from where I think it's lasers at 6 and feelings at 1. So if you're good at lasers, that means you're technical, and if you're good at feelings, you're good at like social or like social stuff, or it's like technical skills and like social skills basically.
Sure.
When you create your character, you choose, are you more technical or more like social oriented? And then you might choose a number between, I think it's 5 and 2, so you can't be at the extremes. But say you choose like a 4. So whenever you want to roll for something that the GM decides is like a social skill, you try to roll closer to feelings, closer to 1. So you have to roll below the marker that you set. And if you're trying to do something technical, you have to roll above it. So the more the more feelings you have, the less lasers you've got, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's such a ridiculously simple resolution system. But it's just enough that I felt like there is at least something here that I can always come back to. Is like, is this technical or is it not? And if it's not, then you roll low, and if it's technical, then you roll high, and then we'll see how it goes. I'd rather have that system. You use that system, just roll a d6 and try to get higher or lower based on some arbitrary line that you've set for yourself, than a pared down version of D&D. Because then to me it's not even D&D anymore. So why am I clinging on to this other thing when this simpler thing that would work, I think, better?
I think so. I hear what you're saying, and that makes sense to me. I don't broadly disagree. I just think that there is a part of the zeitgeist and the like fantasy genre that D&D does capture that helps tone set for people to know what they're getting into. So if I called it lasers and feelings, you're probably less likely to think of like, a setting that includes like a lava spirit in a mountain on a volcano that we're walking on because we were in Hawaii, right? And so like it evokes a different, image to play that game. I could call it something else, right? And call it like, charisma and spirits. That's a terrible name, but like you could capture sort of the same thing,
sure,
and use spirits as magic instead of lasers. And so like, yeah, you're right. That's true. You could do that. I just happened not to, because in the 5 minutes I was like, yeah, no, but so your comment about one page RPGs reminded me of this fun challenge that I've been doing to myself, and I recommend this to anybody just because it's sort of fun. It's also potential train wreck, so fair warning. I have been challenging myself to run Draw Steel with less and less prep, because I'm trying to like identify what the like minimal amount of prep that I need to run a game is, just sort of out of curiosity, and to identify what absolutely needs to be on the page when I'm running adventures for it.
Interesting.
And so on Sunday, one of my games got canceled, and I had known for days that this was the case. But at like 11 a.m., I was like, I bet I could get people to play Draw Steel today. And I'll give myself 5 hours just to see if I can do it. I asked some friends, and they're like, sure, yeah, of course. I did it, and it was a wild thing to do because, my friends aren't that familiar with the system because they haven't played it that many times. Draw Steel is very crunchy, right? Like there are a lot of like numbers, mechanics, and things to keep track of. But it really forces you to try to prioritize what is absolutely critical for this session, and to only do that. And that's like a fun challenge, especially for trying to write adventures for other people, because that helps you identify what the absolutely crucial things are for the game. And of course, you'll have to like add more things to support people who are less comfortable with like improving the parts that you're comfortable with improving. Right?
Yeah.
But some things you always, or almost always, will prepare ahead of time, right? Like, who's the villain? What's the primary conflict? And where are we? Right? And how do the players get involved? And with just those 4 things, you can do a lot. You can do a lot.
Interesting. That is really relevant for me, actually, because I've run a weekly game for 6.5 years approximately. And I've only recently started to figure out how much prep I actually need to do. Because I've been over prepping for years. And I know this. I know I'm over prepping because I notice it when I'm actually DMing. I notice that I've done so much work for what are you that I'm never going to use. And
I write books before I sit down, you know? Like, I get it. I get it. We're there. We're on the same page. Yeah.
And I always try to repurpose, but sometimes it's just all that work.
Especially since when I'm writing books, I really prioritize letting people have choices. And so there will always be content that people don't get, right? Yeah. Like in Murders at Lorlock Manor, there's like an ice cellar behind the kitchen where you show up to this party, are invited just like the other guests, and you're in this dining room, and you don't have to go in the cellar. There's like a reasonably high chance that you don't. But like, you know, you reward people for their curiosity and poking around and looking at stuff. Sure. And that's where they find the 4 bodies of the murderer's, you know, first victims. And so you get like a little bit of a heads up, like, oh, stuff is happening, and getting like early clues. But you don't need those early clues to solve it. It's just sort of a reward. You know, I get it. I get over prepping. I get wasted effort. I get trying to repurpose stuff and not being able to. Yeah, we're on the same page.
I've finally started to kind of keep it down or reduce the amount of prep I do to see if I just make some bullet points here, will I actually make that work? Because I did an experiment early when I started the DM to try to just do minimal prep, because that's what everyone says. Don't do too much. Always just what the bare minimum is, just what you need, and just improv the rest at the table. And that was such a horrible experience for me because I totally tanked. And
it's the bare minimum for you, though. That's the key. Yeah, like if you personally need to write your like boxed text beforehand, do it. Ignore all the people who are like, oh, just improv that. Just come up with it on the fly. If you need to do that beforehand, do it. Right? Yeah. Like, it's whatever the minimum is for you. I feel very strongly about it.
Yeah. I did the bare minimum of what was basically possible and got scared after that for many years. So it's only recently, because I'm one of those that type out we play Norwegian. We play a lot of English language adventures. I translate the box text to Norwegian, and up until like a couple of months ago, I translated the whole thing, all the box text in the whole adventure. I translate to Norwegian to be able to read it to my players naturally when they go into a room or whatever. And now I make some bullet points and like, okay, these 3 sentences is basically just saying it's cold in here, or like there's a few bodies on the floor, one of them is torn up or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just recently started doing this, and it's actually working, and I'm just so relieved, because just the amount of text that I need to write to prepare for one evening is reduced so significantly. It's
you should take a look at what is it? I think it's Halls of the Blood King. This is like an OSR adventure that is really good at very succinctly describing what is in a room or in a location, and then giving you like bullet pointed things of what are the interactable things in the room. Because as a GM, that's all you really need, right?
Yeah. So
I've been adapting that strategy too in exoecology, and I'm sure I'll do it for this Draw Steel adventure too, because I'm addicted and it's useful.
Have you run anything from Where Evil Lives?
No, I haven't.
Because they don't use box text either. They also have kind of like a bulleted list at the beginning of the room description where they just have like, these are here are like 3 sentences that should be mentioned when you describe this room. And then there's like, and here are 2 secret things in this room that also have like a sentence associated with them if they discover something. I'd never seen those before or anything like it. I've mostly run Wizards of the Coast stuff. And then I did some stuff from Arcadia, and then now we're in the middle of like this huge campaign thing that I kickstarted in 2019, And I I basically said to my players, I've got this thing. I paid a lot of money for it in 2019 when it kickstarted. Would you please allow me to run it?
Cool. Yeah.
And they agreed, and it has its ups and downs. I have some serious problems with some of the dungeons. At least I think I'm finally starting to kind of get to develop a taste for dungeons, because some of them are just so poorly. It's not that they're poorly laid out or anything. It's mostly the text that comes along with the rooms, like the descriptions and how they organize the different parts of the information, that in some cases is so confusing that it almost feels like they've only heard about how you should write an adventure, and then just try to do it.
It's hard. So
yeah.
There's something that I think it was James Introcaso who said this, and it stuck with me for a long time. I hope I'm not misattributing it. If not, I'm sure he knows it. Oh, wait, maybe it was Sean Merwin. It was one of the sort of preeminent game designers that I really respect, who basically said boxed text is one of the only times that the game designer gets to talk to the players at the table. Right? Because all of the other text in a book is targeted at the GMs. And so that text is really important, and you have to be very careful about how you write it, because you are directly talking to the players, and you have to just convey the stuff that's important. If that's vibe, if it's tone, that's fine. You should do that carefully. But you have to convey the game critical information because you're playing a game.
Interesting.
And so there are like whole schools of thought on how to write good box text, and there are a lot of people who've thought quite a bit about it. I'm almost positive that was Sean Merwin, now that I think about
it. I remember I was running an adventure for a group of complete strangers. We were playing Draw Steel. I'd recruited some people from the Discord server, and I started reading some of the box text, and in the middle of it, I just went, "Whew, this is a much," because it was so flowery, the language, and it was so over the top for what I would consider necessary, that in the middle of the box text, I'm like, I'm just gonna read it as it is. But yeah, this is too much.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just starting to develop a taste in box text and adventure design, I guess. We're nearing the end of the interview, and I always ask my guests if they have something they want to recommend to the listeners. It might be anything they should check out or just be aware of. So what have you got for us?
Sure. So I am a murder mystery aficionado. So if you haven't seen it, my top recommendation would be to watch Knives Out.
Yes.
But I'm sure that also, if people are interested in running mysteries, you should check out the Alexandrian, he's got a great, Justin Alexander runs this blog that has this great article and series of articles about node-based design and the 3 clue rule for mystery writing. And that stuff is really useful for designing your own mysteries.
I really enjoy Knives Out.
It's such a good movie. It's so good.
It is.
Yeah. I think writing something like Knives Out, where you have this layered intrigue and a surprising result that makes sense in retrospect, that's always the thing that I'm chasing in all of my mysteries. It's just so fun. That feeling is so fun.
That's one of my favorite parts, going back to some of the books that I've read earlier, and then noticing all the small clues that the author left behind for repeat readers. I'm like, oh, I know.
Yeah. But it's also not even just for the repeat readers. It's for the people who, it's the foreshadowing that you don't know is foreshadowing that makes you like pleasantly surprised at the end instead of feeling hoodwinked.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you have all of those clues early on and people don't know what they mean, some people will fixate and be like, I don't know what that means. And then when that question is answered, they're like, oh, I know what that means now. And that's really fun. That's a really fun angle.
Andie, thank you so much for coming on. It was really a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a great time.
thank you so much, Andie, for coming on. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Links to Andie's website with links to old projects, the crowdfunding page for the Great Thaw of Gryzmithrak Spire, the Exoecology for Monster Hunters Kickstarter, and their 2 favorite Alexandrian posts is in the episode description. If you want to be featured on Goblin Points, or know of someone else who should be, leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, or send me an email on tips@goblinpoints.com. Links to the MCDM Discord server, the subreddits for MCDM and Draw Steel, the YouTube channels of Matt and MCDM, the complete link section, and this script is in the show notes. It's also on goblinpoints.com. Next episode is on the 5th. That'll be the roundup episode for March. See you next time. Snackis.